I sat down with Doberman Dan, aka Dan Gallapoo, and had a very, very wide ranging discussion about the fluid state of the world and where we're at with AI and all the things that people are afraid of, where business is going, where marketing is going. We also got into lots of other topics like evolution and the origin of life and cancer and mathematics and what does it all mean. It was one of the most fun conversations I've had in a long time. I think you're really going to enjoy this. Listen up. Well, the whole world, like with AI and everything, is in a transition. And it has this very fluid, uncertain, wobbly feel. And it kind of scares you and it kind of keeps you up at night. That's what it feels when you're in an opportunity zone.
Hmm. Interesting. So what you're saying is it feels uncomfortable,
Absolutely feels uncomfortable.
maybe even anxiety causing at times.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So
yeah.
these are actually good things.
They are. When the company got sold, it was a month and a day after 9/11. And like orders were not coming in. The world was in the state of suspended animation. Everybody was scared to death. We didn't know if we were about to get into some war. We didn't know if some other building is going to blow up. And and so I got a job offer from the company that was buying us out. And it wasn't a very good job offer, but it was a job. And I was tempted to take it. My wife goes, "This is your chance. Like, go out on your own." I'm like, "Now?" And this lady said to me, "Perry, the time of uncertainty is the time of greatest opportunity. Like, yes, this is the sort of time that you take your leap." Well, she was exactly right because there was never a better time to switch your mindset from hiring an employee to hiring a freelance marketing consultant that you could fire in an instant if he wasn't working out. The world was just starting to turn into a gig economy. And so it was a perfect time to do that. And, a year later, it became obvious, yeah, that was the thing to do. And staying with the old company would have been suicide. It would have broken my heart because most of the time, I mean, my job, I took so seriously. I treated it like it was my own business. I poured my heart into that. I created a great deal of our marketing material. I was involved in everything. I knew all the reps and all the distributors. I was very invested in it. The company that bought us out didn't appreciate any of that. They bought us out because they wanted the intellectual property rights to a chip that we had developed. They didn't have any regard for any of our sales channel, any of our marketing. They assumed we were idiots. By the way, anytime a company buys your company, it's because they think they're smarter than you.
Hmm.
And you need to go along with that. In fact, that's why you go, "Oh, you guys have so many more resources and you have so much more staff and you can do so many, what could you do with this thing? This little burnt offering that I have, created for you. Yeah, just, write me a check and I'll let you guys do your magic." And I mean, you kind of have to go along with that illusion, quite frankly. Most of the time, they completely destroy whatever you created. And I remember a guy saying to me, this is a very important moment in my life. He goes, "Perry, the old company you used to work for does not exist anymore. Forget it." He goes, "You need to go on like you got divorced and you don't care who she's dating or like you're in a new life." And the way he said that, it clicked in my head. I'm like, "Oh, I get it." I just left it behind. That is rear view mirror. I'm on to the next adventure. They completely gutted the whole thing. Didn't matter. I got my stock options. I got out, and and the next thing was very exciting.
And look where all that led. And so I want to ask your take on AI because I know you're on top of that. But before that, you've been through several reinventions of yourself
Yes.
just to get everybody up to speed. What do you do now?
So I train and coach and consult on 80/20 and business strategy and growth, um, kind of like a post direct marketing like direct marketing is part of it, certainly, but I'd say I've moved beyond just those kind of things. I spend about a third of my life in evolutionary biology, origin of life, and cancer research. It's a very big part of my life. I organized a $10 million prize for the origin of the genetic code, which is the largest fundamental science research prize in the world. I co-founded something called the Cancer and Evolution Working Group, which has 3,500 member scientists. And I spoke at a science conference last weekend in Los Angeles. So the reinventions are engineer, then salesman, then marketer, then internet marketer, then Google expert. Then we wrote a book on Facebook advertising, although I never really was the expert on Facebook advertising. That was co-authors. And then we have a TikTok book as well. And then reinvented into 80/20, and then reinvented into business strategy. And then uh, the evolutionary biology is a reinvention and the cancer is a reinvention. But the thing is all of these things have a whole bunch of common threads that run between them. I see them all as part of the same whole. So, for example, I'm curious in the chat. Give me a one in the chat if you have ever run a Google ad, a Facebook ad, a YouTube ad, an Instagram ad, or a TikTok ad. If you have put money in the machine and pulled the slot.
I could add a one to that group.
Okay, all of you understand evolutionary biology way better than you think you do.
How's that?
Because because the proliferation of ads on the internet is identical to the multiplication of cells or rabbits or mice or people or baboons. All the principles of natural selection apply, all the principles of variation apply, all the principles of intrinsic intelligence apply, all the principles of creative input, they're all the same. It's just on a different substrate. And so when I got into evolutionary biology, I suddenly realized I knew a whole lot more about it than I thought I did. In fact, I knew a lot of things that the biologists didn't know because I had an experimental take on it that they didn't. A biologist doesn't get to decide, unless they're a really sophisticated bioengineer, they don't get to decide what kind of bacterial adaptations happen in the petri dish. But when you run a Google ad, you're running the petri dish. You're deciding what the next bacteria is going to look like. It's that ad that you just wrote. And the marketplace and the selective pressures determine whether your ad gets seen by 100,000 people or only gets seen by 100. And the money that you bid is how much energy you're willing to expend to make that thing go. So all of these things are analogous. So then I get into cancer. Well, cancer is just the cells of your own body evolving out of control. So think of a cancer cell as a very, very disgruntled employee who, used to like things around here, used to be happy, used to like his job. Um, but then the breaks got shorter and the food got worse and the management got mean and nasty. And then he turned into a little terrorist. And he organized a coup and he recruited a bunch of other guys. And now you got, in the galley ship, room number 3 has a bunch of guys with guns and hand grenades and machine guns. And now we don't know what to do with these guys. And they're taking all the ship's supplies and they turned off our water supply and they stole the diesel fuel. That's what cancer is. And so all of these things go together. My electrical engineering background was, I have a degree in electrical engineering. It was a great background for understanding Google because Google is run by engineers. And so I've, let's be clear about something. I've always been the misfit. I've always been the nerd or the geek or like nobody else seems to be interested in this weird stuff that I'm into. Um, I think this is true of most copywriters. My take of all the best copywriters is they're just insatiably curious. They want to learn about everything. They know something about everything. They have about 2,000 books in their house on about oh 626 different topics, and they just like their ADHD and their thirst, their appetite for information is so it is just so relentless that they just can't stop. And so you get a new client, like the client sells orchids. You're like, well, I guess I'm going to learn everything there is to know about orchids now.
Yes. Uh, Gosh, man, you just described me.
I know you,
Speaking,
Dan. Even though I haven't seen you in a long time, like you're one of us.
yeah, that is the truth. When you were speaking about Google being run by engineers, that when I think of Google these days, automatically in conjunction with that, I think of AI.
Yeah.
And so I know you're on top of that. I think the biggest question I have, and I know a lot of copywriters and marketers have this too, is how is this gonna affect us as marketers? Because I hear everything from the extreme of we'll be obsolete, out of business, to oh, it'll never replace what we do. And I'm trying to see where's the truth within those two.
That's a great question. So let's start with the extremes. So there's a lot of hype that, it's going to wake up or maybe it's already sentient. Uh, the machines are going to take over. And you got to understand something. I do not see the slightest evidence that AI has any kind of consciousness or self-awareness at all. If a computer is what an engineer understands it to be, it's just a bunch of logic gates, and it's like if you strung enough pocket calculators together, you'd have Chat GPT. I mean, it would take a lot, but it's just a glorified calculator, is all of that it is. Humans have self-awareness, humans have spirits, humans have out of body experiences, humans have near death experience, humans are religious, humans have religious experiences, humans have emotions. AI only mimics emotions. And biology is 100 million times more sophisticated than anything humans have ever come up with. A teaspoon of bacteria is doing more programming than all the engineers at Google. And people don't realize this. Like they think just because a machine can now fool a human into thinking that they're typing to another human. Oh my word, like it's the greatest thing in history. Well, it's a big deal. I'll give you that. It's not even close to a cell. Like a cell is as sophisticated as Manhattan. Okay, so that's the starting point. It's light years from doing what biology does. That's the first thing. The second thing is it's forcing us to re-examine what it means to be human because a couple years ago, I can write haikus, therefore I am human. I can make words rhyme, therefore I am human. I could write a song about my girlfriend breaking up with me, therefore I am human. Okay, now a large language model can do a bunch of computation. It can produce all of that on command. Oh, well, maybe who am I? Well, that's an identity question. Well, all of the questions this raises are the questions that all of the religions and the the sages and the philosophers have been talking about for 3,000 years. And these are typically things that like the average IT guy goes, well, I don't even see why are we even talking about that? That doesn't make any sense to me. Well, you better start paying attention. You better start reading the poetry. You better start reading the old scriptures. You better start reading the old masters. I mean, I've said for years, you should read something written before Gutenberg every day.
Hmm.
And so I'll give you a third perspective. I just recently started playing with Benson, the AI tool. And at first, I really disliked it. I had like a just a negative gut reaction to the whole thing. And I think the reason why was I would put stuff in and I would generate outputs and I would look at it and I would go, this just sounds like a bunch of marketing tropes. And I would not sign my name to any of the stuff that it's producing. And that was my first initial reaction. I kept playing with it. I had a long conversation with my wife about it. And I started seriously trying to make it work. And what I came around to was what this does is this builds a scaffolding that says if you want to sell a certain kind of product to a certain kind of person, it should roughly go along this trajectory. It should address these concerns at these points in time. But you have not done your job as a copywriter until you can own every word that that thing says. And that means there's a lot of work to make it sound the way you want it to sound. And there's a lot of ways to do it. You can highlight paragraph and right click and have 10 different options of how you want to retranslate that paragraph. And you can probably find one that's close to what you want to say, and then you can fix it up. But the thing you have to get it, the point is not to write a VSL in 7 minutes, even if it can, because you probably don't want to use that VSL. The point is to do better work than you ever did before without it. That is always the point. The point is your output as an artist and a creator is superior to anything you could have done without the tool. Maybe because it saved you some time, maybe because it pulled in ideas that you wouldn't have pulled it in yourself. So here's an analogy. How many of you guys remember the phrase from the 90s, the last mile on the internet? The last mile of a dial-up, like, so you have the internet, but the last mile is a slow dial-up connection on your phone line. Or the last mile is Amazon bringing a package to your house. And for everybody to get high-speed internet, thousands of guys with trucks and fiber optic cables had to go to all the telephone poles and all the houses and run the fiber from Comcast to your house or AT&T to your house, and they had to do the last mile. It was billions of dollars and it took years. So compare the last mile to the first 10,000 miles. The first 10,000 miles, the backbone of the internet, and there's fiber optic cables, and it's 1999. Your message goes ultra super fast from San Francisco to Washington, D.C., but the last mile is on a 28K modem. And then you got fiber. Or Guangzhou shipping to warehouse in Indianapolis. Used to be impossible. 200 years ago, that was impossible. Now it's easy. It's a shipping container. But the last mile, getting it from the Indianapolis warehouse to your doorstep, that's really hard. AI is the 10,000 miles, and the human is the last mile.
Good analogy.
And your job is the last mile. And the illusion, there's like a real, it like almost splits your head in half. You're like, I asked a question, I pushed a button, I got this answer in 10 seconds. And there's this huge disconnect between the 10 hours that you're going to have to spend to make that a really great piece of copy. It still probably take you 10 hours. If you're trying to make a copywriting masterpiece, or it take you 10 days or 10 weeks, you can't argue with that. You use the tool to get it as far as it'll get you, but you don't be content with, oh, well, that's 85% good enough. 85% good enough is not going to be worth anything in about a year. It's
Hmm.
already starting to not be worth anything. There's already tons of AI generated retread all over the internet. It's already happening. In fact, this is the problem that Google and ChatGPT now have, is since AI is trained on the internet, and now the internet is full of AI stuff, it's just turning into an echo chamber of mediocrity. And that means the next arms race is the really good content creators rising to the top. And AI will help. But you know what it's like? It's like I remember going in a record store when I was about 12 and I read the back of Boston's first album and called Boston. It's got More Than a Feeling and all these classic songs on it. And basically what the liner note on the back of the album said, so who are these guys? Nobody knows who they are. I'll just tell you, it's run by a genius from MIT who has an engineering degree and he invented all these cool music things. But here's what you really need to know. We have tons of cool technology in this album, but you got to understand the technology serves the music. The music does not serve the technology. I mean, it went out of its way to come out and say that. And I remember how it struck me what they were saying. And the result of that is that album has aged very well.
Very well. Even
People
to
are,
this day, it's fresh. And I don't mean the composition, I mean the recording quality.
yes, the recording is great. The melody is great. The sounds are great as compared to, there's all kinds of songs by, I don't know, Susie and the Banshees or Boy George or something, and they sound very 80s. You're like, well, if you want to hear 80s syntho pop, then, you know, have at it. But it's really not that popular and it has not aged well. Art that ages well is art where the technology always served the art. When people look at the David statue in the museum, or like, they don't sit there and talk about, oh yeah, those chisels they had in 1536. Nobody nobody really thinks about what chisel, or did the guy have a grinder or a buffer or a chainsaw, or like, you don't care about that. You care about, is this a great piece of art? So the copywriters, all your people who are listening here, you're all artists. Your job is to make really great art. You're not just hustling for a buck. Yeah, I know part of your job, you got to hustle for a buck. And maybe you've got to come up with 10 emails in the next hour and a half, and that's fine. But it's got to be beautiful.
Well said. That really puts that puts AI in perspective for me a lot better. How do you see it affecting how's that going to affect the people on online advertising platforms, Google ads, Facebook ads, others?
Well, so what it means is, if all you're doing, so I've written a bunch of advertising books. Like, this is the 2007 Google advertising book right here, 17 years old. And if like if you're a digital agency and all you're doing is reading a book like this and following the instructions, like you're going to be out of business. I think digital agencies are today are like travel agencies 20 years ago. Well, travel agent was just somebody who had a computer screen that you didn't have. And then when you had a computer screen, why did you need a travel agent? And they all went out of business. But not all of them went out of business because the high end ones that actually knew something, because they sell $70,000 vacations to rich people. They've been to that resort. They've ate at that restaurant. They've been on that trip. They've been on that ski lift. Like they know all this stuff. And so they can do something for you that the internet can't do, and they have a job. It's a pretty good job too. So I think a lot of marketing jobs are headed that direction. So it means like the really ordinary, just point and click, standard operating procedure kind of stuff. And this is in lots of things. It's probably Dunkin' French fries too. Those jobs are going to go away. But I have a saying, the job AI took from you, you never really liked in the first place.
That's probably true.
That's almost certainly true. There's really not that many things that AI does that humans actually think is interesting. So, but I don't think this is going to create massive unemployment. And here's why. The Industrial Revolution has been with us for 500 years. And for 500 years, people are going, technology is going to take our jobs. Machines are going to take our jobs. Steam engines are going to take our jobs. Every one of those things create jobs. Steam engines create jobs. Computers create jobs. Railroads create jobs. Airplanes create jobs. Cars create jobs. Microwave ovens create jobs.
True.
It's always been true. It always will be.
So we've got the historical precedence of that. So why would AI be different?
No, AI is not different. So when AI, like there used to be a job called elevator operator.
Yes.
There used to be a job called guy who brings ice to the ice box in your house. There used to be blacksmiths. And I don't think anybody misses blacksmiths or elevator operators or ice deliverers. Nobody cares. Oh, I got a job delivering ice. We carve it out of a lake, we put it in a freezer, and then in the summertime we take it to everybody's house. That's my job. You're like, why do you want to do that? Can't you find something interesting to do? So, in marketing, it means the real work, which I realized this 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, I did a seminar with Richard Koch, who's now a billionaire. He was only worth 200 million back then. And it was called the Star Principles Seminar. And it was about what kind of companies and what kind of markets doing what kind of simplifications always dominate the market, always make the most money. It was a much more high level than writing Google ads or writing copy. Just went to a whole much more strategic level of business. And I realized then, this direct marketing stuff has an expiration date. Like there's being able to write a great headline will only take you so far. You're just micro optimizing a certain part of a business when you do that. But are you even in the right business? Are you even in the right market? Are you even selling to the right customers? Should you get out of this market and go into something completely different? And so I made that switch about 10 years ago. And those are all the things that make the difference. So the machine can almost write the copy for you now. But what's your USP? The machine can't tell you what your USP is.
Mm-hmm.
It
Good
can
point.
suggest what it should be, but you're going to have to commit to it. You're going to have to design in the features. You have to figure out what the people actually want. And then you need to show it to them and prove them to them. And you've got to build the proof. And that's what the marketer does. And so it's moving to higher and higher and higher levels of thinking. And so, like, AI could do your thinking for you. But if you're a better human being than that, AI is an anvil for helping you refine your thinking and thinking better and doing better research. It's like a calculator. I don't know any. Imagine going to your accountant and saying, no, 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 no. Stop using all those spreadsheets. I want you to use a hand calculator. Oh, no, 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 no. You can't use a hand calculator. You got to do all the multiplication and division by hand. Like nobody would ever say that. When you have a calculator, and I absolutely say this with authority as an engineer, if you have a calculator and it does all the number crunching for you, it allows you to think about higher level math problems that calculators can't think about. Same with a spreadsheet. It's like mathematics is not carrying the four and doing multiplication on a piece of paper. That's not what mathematics is. Mathematics is like this whole beautiful like universe of ideas and concepts. Like go watch it. Why don't you type in YouTube, go to, type in advanced mathematical concepts and, watch the next video that comes in. They'll show you some crazy thing. They'll show you symbols. Why do mathematicians think in symbols? Because what they're saying is instead of putting a number in this statement, I want to be able to put any number in the statement and then know something about what would happen to any number. See, that's higher and higher, higher level thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're not into math, but you still understand what I'm saying. And so you should be reading more and you should be trying more things and you should be pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and learning to think with more discernment and more wisdom and more clarity, and then using your intuition, using your spiritual sensibilities. I think our educational system and our society is always pushing us to be less than human because that's what's convenient for everybody else.
Absolutely. That's what the powers that be want out of worker bees.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which is everything you explained about AI. That makes sense to me. That kind of eases my concerns. And you're talking about all the things that won't be obsolete, the high level thinker. But then you mention intuition. That also is a valuable,
Mm-hmm.
crucial thing that somebody's going to have. Now that fascinates me at this point in my life, and it leads in perfectly what I wanted to talk to you about memos from the head office.
Yes.
Your book, if I don't know if anybody's aware that Perry has that book. It's called Memos from the Head Office.
Yeah.
And would you tell everybody about this book, please?
Well, I'll tell you the story where it came from. So in 2003, Ken McCarthy said, everybody, you gotta read this book called The 80-20 Principle by Richard Koch. And so I read this book and I got to page 14 and he said this statement that just set my brain on fire. He said, 80-20 has a lot to do with chaos theory and fractals. And then he went on, he didn't say anything else about it. But when he said that, I was like, whoa, I know about that. So let me tell you a quick other story. When I was about 21, my wife came home from the library and she had this book on fractals. And fractals are, you got to, probably most, probably most people know what these things are, but just in case anybody doesn't, um, here, I'm going to share my screen. Post, you'll have to make
Oh,
me,
do I have to? I hate when it does that. Okay, should be good to go now.
okay, so this is what fractals look like. They're these swirly patterns. And when you zoom into a fractal, you see the same pattern repeating over and over. You're getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And then all of a sudden, you see that same spiral again. And so fractal means pattern in a pattern in a pattern in a pattern. And I read this book and I suddenly, well, I thought it was amazing. Uh, and it said, trees are fractal because there's branches and branches on the branches and branches on the branches on the branches. You can go all the way down to the little veins in the leaves, and you can get a microscope, and it just keeps going and going and going. And weather is fractal, and earthquakes are fractal. And so I got this idea of, and then I walked out to my car the next morning, and I saw ice crystals growing on a cold morning on the top of the car. And I go, oh my goodness, they're everywhere. Whoa. And from that point forward, I could not see fractals everywhere. Roads, you have interstate highways and then smaller streets and smaller streets and then paths and, sheep trails and, the, ant trails. So all of a sudden I see patterns and patterns and patterns. Richard says this, and he says 80-20, the Pareto principle is fractal. And I'm like, whoa, that means this is super fundamental. This isn't just an interesting little rule of thumb. This is like how the world fundamentally operates. And 80-20 is the math of fractals, which I had never connected. And so, oh my goodness, I just went into a vortex and I geeked out. It was just the most pleasurable experience of having that realization. Well, so I got to thinking about it. I thought, okay, then that means, and here I'll draw on my piece of paper here. I said that means that if I have a group of people, like I have customer number one or let's say customer number 100 over here, and I have customer number one over here, that the amount of money they spend is going to go up, and it's going to be in a curve that goes up towards infinity as you get to the right side. And your top customer can almost spend an infinite amount of money if they're passionate enough.
Hmm.
And I was like, that's a calculus formula. What is it? Now, again, I'm an engineer, so like I'm used to this kind of stuff, but I couldn't figure it out. So there's this one day, it was a Friday. Like, what is that formula? And I was banging away in my office and I was looking on the internet. I couldn't find anything that was like what I was looking for. And I couldn't work out how the math worked. And so I was just kind of stuck on it. So I was just obsessing about this math formula all day long. And then the other thing I was obsessing about that day, Dan, I think you might have an obsessive personality like I do.
Yeah, that is
You,
true.
you geek out on stuff and you just can't stop thinking about it. The other thing I couldn't stop thinking about was 3 days earlier, I had done my first teleseminar. Again, this is 2003. And I got a bunch of people on a phone line and I sold $11,000 in 1 hour, which absolutely split my brain open. I was like, wow, like I got a month's worth of revenue in 1 hour. I was just astounded. And so I thought, boy, my brother-in-law's got his project in Mozambique and they got all those poor people over there. I could probably help with that. How could I use my business to, so I was thinking about calculus in Mozambique all day long. So we're having dinner. My wife goes, hey, there's a music thing at church. I'll watch the kids. You go. And I'm like, okay. So I go to this church thing. And so they're playing this Pink Floyd sort of music. And I'm just lost. And I'm thinking about calculus and I'm thinking about Mozambique. And I look up, and this black lady is walking right towards me. And she sticks out her hand. She says, "Hi, my name is Vivian, and the Lord gave me a word for you." I have never had anything like this happen to me. I always went to churches where you never ever do anything like that.
Right.
But she goes, "The Lord told me that you're very, very good at math and you're working on some kind of equation, some kind of formula, some kind of invention, and you're going to figure it out. You just got to keep working at it. You're going to figure it out." And I looked at her and I looked around and I thought, how many people in this room are working on a math problem right now? Oh, my word. And then she turned to walk away and she spun around. She goes, "Oh, and he told me something else too. You want to support missions, and God is going to bless your business so you can support missions."
Holy smokes.
She nailed it twice. Total stranger. I have no idea who this person is. Never seen her in my life. And I haven't talked to anybody about this either. I haven't talked to anybody about this math problem. So she totally had my attention. And I just stared at her with my mouth open. And I said, "If only you knew." And she goes, "He knows." And she walks away. And I stood there. I was like, I just got a memo from the head office. That's crazy. I've heard of stuff like this. It actually happened to me. And it really touched me at a deep level. Why? She read me my mail. I
Hmm.
really cared about this stuff. I hadn't talked to anybody about it, and she put her finger on it twice. Well, that was my first prophetic experience. And after that, I started having more and more and more. I only saw her one other time, very briefly, and 10 years went by. And I always remembered this. This was such a incredible experience. And so when I wrote the 80/20 book, the dedication mentions Vivian. And I said, I got to find this lady. And I tracked her down and we had dinner and we came up. We became friends. I came up with this idea. I said, "Hey, I want to try a crazy experiment. I want to get you and this other woman I know on a go-to webinar. I want to get like 30 people on the line. I want to tell them the Vivian story that you guys just heard and say, if you stay on the webinar, Vivian and Aaron will give you memos too." And so I get 30 people on a webinar and I'd go, "Dan G, go." And they would go. And then
Huh.
I would say, "Jeffrey A, go." And then John P, go. And Michael J, go. And I'm looking at names. I would just feed them names. They didn't look anybody up. In fact, I don't even think they could see the names. We had it set up that way. And they would just go. And I get people typing in the chat. They're going, "Oh my word. Like, I'm crying. Like, how did they know this?" And it was such an uplifting experience that we started making it a regular feature of Renaissance Club. So I have a membership called Renaissance Club, and it is, to this day, it is the most popular thing in Renaissance Club. I think we have 8 or 9 of those sessions every month with a limit of, I believe, 15 people. So what's 8 times 15? I think we have 120 people get on these memo sessions every month. And you can get one turn a month. And people that they don't know you and they didn't research you and they didn't do any homework on you, like they just pray for something to say, and they say it. And this has been such a powerful thing in my life. So we started doing that in 2013. So now it's been more than 10 years. I I wrote a book about the stories that have come out of this. So this book is a whole bunch of people, mostly business people, who solved a business problem, not through the usual spreadsheets and mastermind groups and all the other stuff that we do, but rather just by asking for guidance and getting it. And I mean, there's some crazy, uncanny stories in this book. Like there's a story of Shannon Stewart. It was, I believe it was like February 2020, and she hears God tell her she was a tax advisor and an investment advisor. And she heard God tell her, tell your clients to get into cash now. Okay. So she tells all her clients to get into cash. That turned out to be the highest value day in the stock market before COVID started dragging the numbers down. And she had people from the government going, why did you tell people to do that? And
Wow.
where did you get your information? Like these people get watched by regulators. And she goes, God told me, and I told my customers. Like, what does a regulator say to that? Like, I don't know if I think that's covered by free speech. I don't think you can get, arrested for that. But like that story is in this book. And like I think a lot of people are lonely and isolated and they feel like nobody's listening. They feel like nobody's cares. And it's not true. Like somebody does care. And I think one of the scariest things is to open yourself up to the possibility that somebody does care for you and then put yourself out on that ledge where you're waiting to hear that confirmation. And this has been written about for centuries. And there's a term that I think fits very well. It's called the long dark night of the soul. And it's that lonely space where you're waiting for God to meet you. And it's incredibly vulnerable. But there's something that very special that happens when you have that encounter.
So true. And, it seems like people are more open to speaking about it in business settings now
Mm-hmm.
than say 20, 30 years ago. Um, like
Yeah.
I don't I could be wrong. This is just my perception. But now like you're teaching this, um, there's other people who are including this in their business and in their coaching.
Yes. Ed
You
Rush,
know,
for example. Yeah.
And it just seems like people seem to be more open to it. I don't know why that is, but I believe that's true. And I'm talking about in our world, in the business world, right?
I think it is true. And I'll tell you several other things I've observed. About 10 or 15 years ago, almost any time there would be anything religious in a newspaper, like on the Guardian, or there would be a trail of scathing troll comments by a bunch of arrogant atheists ripping people to shreds. And the atheist movement was really strong 15 years ago. It has burned itself out and disintegrated. And people are really sick and tired of it, frankly. And and that has improved. I am seeing. I do a lot of science work. It used to be, science used to be like you don't breathe a word of any of your religious convictions whatsoever, and that has loosened up. I'm not saying like we got actual freedom of speech really, but I am seeing people much more willing to at least nod in that direction or indicate that they think there's something bigger going on in the universe than just atoms and molecules. I've seen that, and I see a lot of hunger, and I think AI is only going to make it worse or better. Worse is not the word. AI is only going to increase the hunger for the other.
I can see that. Yeah. And you know, I just had something on the tip of my tongue. I was um Lee Miltier, you know Lee, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So she was the first person that I encountered who was teaching these kind of principles in a coaching group.
Yeah.
And at first I rolled my eyes thinking this is all woo woo, right?
Right.
I mean, because this is back, I don't know, 15 years ago.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but people were open to it, and she continues to teach it. I just feel like there seems to be more openness to it. I find it fascinating because if you look at, some of the most prominent people in physics, psychology, uh, medicine, even mathematics, Carl Jung, um, yeah, who's Heisenberg, famous quantum physicist,
Yes.
you
Yes.
know, Dr. David Hawkins in medicine. Like when somebody really decides to go deep into their science, they are they almost always end up in mysticism.
Yes. And I can tell you why. Okay, can I just geek out on you for a second?
Please do.
So mathematicians tend to be pretty metaphysical people. They're more likely to be religious than scientists, actually. And here's why. I'll ask you a really simple question. In fact, I want to hear in the chat. Is the number seven real?
That is a good question. I'm
I'm totally serious about that. Is the number seven real? Does it exist? Does seven exist?
I'm eager to see the responses. Just this morning, I'm reading something that totally connects with what you're talking about. So this is kind of freaky.
So there's a no, there's a no, there's a does anything exist? So
That's
how
a good
does the
question.
number seven weigh? How big is it? How many of them are there? When did it exist? Can you touch it? Well, so it doesn't weigh anything, and you can't say how many there are, and it doesn't have a size, and it doesn't have a location. But you've you have mentioned the number seven probably every day of your life for the last 20 years. So, and is seven useful?
We use it every single day, whether we realize it or not.
Yes. Yes. So something that you can't weigh, you can't measure, you can't locate is incredibly useful. It's so useful you couldn't live without it.
Literally could not live without it.
No, you can't live without the number seven. Not in any human existence any of us would recognize. I'm sure there's tribes that didn't have a number seven that stayed alive, but like you can't live without the number seven. Okay, so in mathematics, x is a number that could be seven. So does x exist?
Hmm.
Okay, and or y is an equation that includes x. You just keep getting more and more and more abstract. And all the same questions apply. Well, how much does x weigh? And how many x's are there? And how big is x? And where is x? You cannot exist without abstract things. So if we can't live with the number seven, are you going to tell me that you're sure God doesn't exist?
It's quite a big leap.
What if God is just the infinite abstraction? What if God is just all that is or ever could be? Well, that's not very different from the traditional definitions of God in the first place.
Very true.
Okay. And so, or in science, you have questions like, I'll give you an example. We know a lot about the Big Bang now, to the point where you can run computer models and you can say, well, if all the matter in the universe is compressed into an infinitely small thing and suddenly it bursts out, and 13.8 billion years later, we've got all these stars, one of the calculations they can run is how fast did all that explode? Well, if it exploded a little faster, a tiny bit faster, all of the matter in the universe would have sprayed out and never even collected into stars and planets. And if the explosion was a little slower, it would have collapsed back into a big crunch. And the difference between too much and too little is 0.0000000000001% with 120 zeros. That's true. You can go look this up in physics papers. It's called the cosmological constant. Why was the Big Bang perfectly calibrated to 120 decimal places?
Some sort of intelligence did it.
Yeah. Well, this is only the most controversial idea in science. Where did the origin of life come from? I've got a $10 million prize for the origin of the genetic code. Nobody knows how to get a code without designing one. A lot of people just want to dismiss the question. I don't like that question. I don't want to think about it. Perry's ridiculous. What an idiot. I got Amazon reviews that say stuff like that. Well, do you want to think about the questions or not? Are you willing to deal with the implications or not? I think science strong, like, why is the universe orderly and discoverable, and why does it obey rational laws that make sense? And what is rationality, and what is sense making? And what does a scientific theory even consist of if it's going to make any sense?
Hmm.
These are all fundamentally religious questions. And it's no coincidence that the vast majority of the early scientists like Boyle, Kepler, Newton, Galileo, Copernicus, Maxwell were deeply religious people, and they considered their discovery of the universe to be an act of worship.
Hmm.
If you
Interesting.
want to go deep into this, read my book, Evolution 2.0. In fact, I'll show it to you. It's called Evolution 2.0, Breaking the Deadlock Between Darwin and Design. It has 600 scholarly references in the back. It's endorsed by people from Harvard, Oxford, MIT, UCLA.
That is one book of yours that I have not read yet. I'm going to make sure to get that on my list.
I promise you, you will find this a fascinating book because it tells the story of me. I got in an argument with my brother 20 years ago. He was a missionary in China. And I went to see him, and he goes, "So, Perry, I don't believe Christianity anymore. I'm not sure if I believe in God anymore. I don't want to be a missionary anymore. I'm quitting my job as a missionary and going home." And we got in an argument. And I said, "Brian, look at the hand at the end of your arm. This is a nice piece of engineering. And I should know because I'm an engineer." And "You don't think this is an accumulation of random accidents, do you?" And he goes, "Hold on." He comes right back with your really standard Darwinian answer. And I didn't really know much about Darwinian theory at the time. I just know I had an incredibly strong sense as an engineer that, this hand is like really purposeful. And if my hand is purposeful, it's all purposeful. And that was good enough for me. And he pushed back and we had this argument. And I said, "You know what? I really don't know. There's a lot about this I don't know. I don't know if evolution is true. I don't know if creation is true. I'm just an engineer. I'm going to go home and I am going to figure this out." And I went home and I started buying books. In fact, I mean, I got books all over the place. I've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of science books. And I said, "I'm going to get to the bottom of this." and I started reading scientific papers and going really deep into the literature, I started finding stuff that nobody was talking about. By the way, every really, really good copywriter has had this experience. Well, I started researching a topic and I found a bunch of really important stuff that nobody is talking about. Why isn't anybody talking about this? This is my why isn't anybody talking about this evolution book. What I found was, to oversimplify it, you had two sides. You had the religious people and you had the atheists. You had the creationists and the Darwinists. The creationists said God did it. It's all a big miracle. The Darwinists said it's billiard balls banging around the universe and natural selection. And they would just like beat on each other. What I found was there was 80 years of literature showing that every cell, every living thing in existence, in some sense, is smarter than you are. And bacteria cut, splice, and rearrange their DNA. They change their own genetics. They adapt to incredibly difficult situations at phenomenal speed. They are engineers. They are programmers. Engineering and programming is at the root of what life does and is. And nobody is showing you all of the examples of all the experiments where they got a new species literally the next day.
Hmm.
Um, it, and it sheds so much light on your immune system in your body, and it speaks volumes about health and nutrition. This is how I ended up starting the Cancer and Evolution group, because cancer is your own cells evolving out of control, and if you don't understand evolution, you'll never understand cancer. And if you don't understand cancer, you'll never understand evolution. So the two really go together. Well, now that's a scientific society with 3,500 members, and I'm a co-founder, and I go speak at science conferences. I was a chair of one of the sessions at a cancer conference at MD Anderson a month ago. And so I'm into lots of different things, and the world is so fascinating. I have to go in a couple minutes, but I just want to encourage you guys all. I realize the world is in this weird place and everything seems uncertain, and I get it. But I'm telling you, life is amazing. And if you just keep your curiosity is like the best thing ever. You just stay curious and not get scared. And next thing that comes, tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock, something scary comes on, switch on your curiosity instead of your fight or flight and dive into it.
Well said. I love that advice. Perry, thank you so much for doing this. For those who are not already in your world, who'd like to get involved, where do they find you, or what's the best way to get involved?
So I got two paths you could take. If you want the business stuff, go to perrymarshall.com, and on the homepage, you'll find an opt-in for the Perry Marshall Minute, and get on my email list, and you take it from there. If you're interested in the science stuff, buy my book, Evolution 2.0. It's on Amazon for $15 or whatever, and read that book and sign up for the bonuses on the website, which are in the book, and we'll take you down the science rabbit trail. It is so fascinating, and it all ties together. It's all one world, it's all one order, it's all one universe, and like it's our playground. We get to play in it.
I love that analogy. And that's a great way to wrap this up. Perry, thanks a million. I appreciate it.
Great to see you, man. Great to
Great
catch
to
up.
see you
Thank
too.
you for having it. It's such an honor. Great,
Oh, my pleasure, man. Thank you.
great group you have. Take care.
All
Bye.
right. Take care. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you being here. We'll see you next month. Bye bye.